Huh? I found myself muttering. I knew my husband had a tendency to do things on his own, but I never thought he would pull off something this massive. What do you mean by that? My husband laughed, carefree on the phone.
It's just as I said.
My mind went blank at the thought of it all. My name is Lily. My family was not rich. We lived with my father's grandparents, so we had a good home, but my father became ill in his 40s, so my mother had to earn money on her own to pay for his treatment and the family's living expenses. We lived paycheck to paycheck. Even as a child, I understood that. My grandfather, however, insisted that he did not want to work anymore even though he had reached retirement age, and my grandmother, who had never worked, often abused my mother to pass the time instead of working. My mother was desperately trying to cope with it all by herself. One day, my mother, who never complained, whispered to me in between housework, "You shouldn't live with us," and it remained in my memory forever. My father was always apologetic, and he cared for my mother and me. His illness worsened and he passed away before I reached adulthood. Then, sometime later, I decided that I wanted to live with my mother when I became an adult. My mother was a patient person, and after my father left, she spent her days caring for her parents-in-law and working part-time. She worked hard, even though they complained to her to take care of them and do her job. I wanted to take my mother out of this old, leaky house someday and set her free. I had always had no trouble studying, and once I had the goal of living alone with my mother, I studied hard, went to a good school, and received a job offer from a well-known company while earning a college degree. After that, I was committed to saving my salary by shuttling back and forth between my parents' house and the office. Thanks to this, I was able to put my grandparents in a retirement home and free my mother from nursing care. I approached my mother about moving out of her current home and finding a new one, but she said it was fine because she could still afford to live there, and told me to spend some money on myself once in a while. I know somehow that you are saving for me, but it's enough. You paid for your grandparents' retirement home. You're still young. You should spend more money for yourself, she said to me. I had seen how hard my mother had worked for so long, and I was determined to repay her more. But she insisted that she wanted this house, which she had lived in for such a long time and knew how to use. So while continuing to save money for the house, I tried to focus on other things a little more. I have been avoiding girls' night outs and drinking parties with coworkers, which I used to think of as a waste of money. But I began to attend these events once in a while as a reward for myself. I met my husband at a drinking party held with people from the company. I thought there was one face I did not recognize, but that person was a male employee's classmate from college. He was in a completely different line of work than I was, and I enjoyed listening to him talk about his work. People around me laughed at me, saying, "You talk about work even at a time like this?" He and I got along well, and we went from dating to marriage in no time at all. At the time, I was happy with this smooth sailing life. Looking back, I think it would have been better if I had gone through a little bit of an ordeal. When my mother heard about my marriage, she was as happy as if it were her own. She told me that I had found a good man. My mother jokingly told me, "This is finally a weight off my shoulders," she said. My husband understood my mother, who raised me with her own hands. He said he could never have done what she did. I was very proud of my mother. When I met his mother, I was nervous about it. Him and my mother got along, but what would his parents think of me? He tried to calm me down by telling me that his parents are not so strict. He told me that they can be rather gruff, but in the end, my nervousness did not dissipate until we met. "I'm home," he exclaimed from the doorway. His parents' house was a bit old, but there was something nostalgic and comforting about it. I could vaguely hear what was probably his mother's voice coming from the living room. "Sorry, it took me so long to clean up." My first impression of his mother-in-law was that she was a friendly person. She was bright, lively, and above all, easy to talk to.
"My future wife is here to greet you."
Hearing the word wife, I felt my heart beat faster. I have been here with the intention of getting married, but when he calls me that, it makes me swoon all over again. We were soon ushered into the living room. "It's nice to meet you. My name is Lily, and your son and I have been together for a while." My mother-in-law responded with a smile and said hello, then turned to him.
"She's such a cute girl, you don't deserve her."
My mother-in-law said this, and my husband smiled shyly, and so did my father-in-law.
"I can't believe you're getting married,"
he said. The conversation was so relaxed from start to finish that my anxiety was completely gone. The time between meeting the parents and the wedding ceremony went by surprisingly quickly, partly because we were both working. Once we had decided on the dress and table arrangements, the wedding was just around the corner. It was a good memory for me that we hurriedly made the invitations together in time for the wedding. My mother also looked at my in-laws and said, "They seem like good people." She sounded relieved. My in-laws always took care of me when I went to their house. It was about 6 months into our marriage that a dark cloud began to hang over our peaceful, newlywed life. My husband had been promoted and his salary had gone up a little, but he was now completely busy. We used to share the household chores on a strictly rotating duty system, but he sometimes came home late at night, so the household chores were now completely my responsibility. It's a busy season right now, so I have to be patient for a while. Besides, now that we are a couple, we have to overcome difficulties together. As I cook dinner, I imagine my husband working frantically at the moment. He's been texting me to go ahead and eat. I feel bad that I'm the only one who can eat while he's working so hard. So I waited until he came home.
"I'm home."
By the time I heard his voice, it was already past midnight, and I was half asleep, waiting for him to come home. "Oh, welcome back."
"You haven't eaten yet?"
My husband looked a little surprised and looked at the side dishes lined up for two on the table. "I wanted to eat with you, and I think I dozed off before I knew it." I watched him put his bag down and heat up the side dish in the microwave.
"I need to talk to you."
I looked back at my husband, who was staring blankly at the microwave. "What is it?" I thought he was just complaining about his work, but then the unexpected words came to me.
"Can you quit your job?"
"What?" My body froze involuntarily at the sudden suggestion from my husband. Inside the quiet apartment room, the only sound I heard was the dull hum of the microwave oven. Why?" For a moment, I felt as if I was in a trance.
"I think I'm going to be even busier from now on. So I want you to be a housewife and support the family."
"But..." My husband continued to talk as if to suppress my words.
"I think if we continue to work together, the burden will fall entirely on you. Besides, my salary is scheduled to go up in the future, so even if you don't work, I'll still support us." It was true that we could live on my husband's salary alone, which he had shown me. But then my secret dream of building a house for my mother... "But I don't have a hard time living the way we do right now." But for some reason, my husband stubbornly insisted that I become a full-time housewife. Strictly speaking, I could already build a house for my mother without our premarital savings. But then we would have to worry about our own house and future savings. We might even want to have children in the future. I continued my life of work and housework with these worries on my mind. Then one day I made a big mistake at work. My boss raised his eyebrows at me, saying it was not like me. I felt ashamed of my inadequacy and apologized many times.
When I got home and was having a late dinner as usual, I inadvertently told my husband about it. My husband immediately said,
"See, I told you to quit your job."
"But..." Then, my husband's words stung me.
"Are you going to continue to cause trouble at your work?"
I couldn't think of anything to say. Recently, my work efficiency had begun to decline, and I was making more mistakes than I realized. This is the first time I've made a big one, but if my desire to keep working causes my co-workers and bosses trouble again,
"I'll support you."
In the end, I submitted my resignation as my husband urged me to do. For a while, I was able to concentrate on household chores and get enough sleep, and I felt that my physical and mental health was improving. I was also able to support my husband better than before. I thought things were going to turn around, but instead, I was forced into a tight corner. I regretted many times that I had not quit my job at that time.
"You don't have a job. Your husband supports you. I can't believe you."
As soon as my mother-in-law found out that I had become a full-time housewife, her attitude changed drastically. It was not only my mother-in-law, but also my father-in-law.
"You married our son because you just wanted to spend all day lounging around, didn't you?"
Their sarcasm grew tougher each time we met. At first, it was just something they said when I visited their house, but now they come over to our apartment because they're home all day anyway. My in-laws would sit on the couch and tell me to get them another cup of tea or a meal. Sometimes, they would look in the corner of the house and say, "You're a housewife and you can't even clean?" And they began to make the typical degrading comments. Since it happened so frequently, I felt numb to it, so I would just ignore them. I was feeling much more stressed than when I was working. Even my husband, whom I depend on, said to me,
"I'm taking care of you, so you should at least do a perfect job at timing your meals."
His demands escalated. He would get angry at me, saying it's common sense that I would be able to do certain chores. I would have been more comfortable if I had been working. My in-laws now come to our home without calling in advance. I was constantly on edge and felt more stressed by the day. I went to the hospital and was told it was due to temporary stress, and when I told my in-laws several times that I was sleeping in today, they now began to suspect I was having an affair. To top it all off, my husband told me,
"You need to take better care of my parents."
He didn't seem to care about my health at all. I was exhausted. Then one day, my husband took a paid day off and invited me for a drive. I had completely forgotten about it until I heard the reason, but it was my birthday. I was tired, but I hadn't been on a road trip in a long time. What's more, he has something to show me. For the first time in a long time, my heart was fluttering, as it had when we were dating. Thank you. For the first time in a long time, I thanked my husband sincerely. But the car was going down a different road than I had expected. I was expecting some sort of restaurant with a nice view, but
here we are.
It was a 20-minute drive to a residential area. In front of me was a newly built house that was about 2 times larger than the other houses. It looked like a 2-family house, and in front of the house stood my parents-in-law. What? I looked up at my husband. I had no idea what was going on.
"This is your present, aren't you happy?"
my husband said while pointing to the house. What? I didn't know what to say.
"You guys took so long."
My in-laws walked toward us with smiles on their faces. I immediately exclaimed, "This is a 2-family home. Where did you get the money to build this?" There was no way we could afford such a house with our savings, but my husband was unconcerned.
"Your savings."
What?
"I saw your bank account the other day. I found that you had saved a lot of money. Thanks to you, we built a beautiful 2-family house."
My in-laws must have known that they had spent my money. They were grinning and looking at me. Without the energy to be outraged, I collapsed to my knees at the reality before me. I slumped to the asphalt, unable to move my body. My husband and in-laws gazed at me with glee.
I'm glad the surprise was a success. We made a great purchase.
I couldn't believe that my savings, which I had saved to give my mother a house, was used without my permission. It was obvious from the magnificence of the house that my savings were almost gone. The lease of our apartment had been terminated, and without a job I had no choice but to stay in the newly built house. My husband complained to me, and every day I had to do housework for everyone, including my in-laws. I became completely apathetic and just became a machine to take care of my husband and in-laws. They wanted to use me as a convenient slave and a moneylender. As I was washing the dishes, I heard them giggling in the living room while watching TV. It was at this point that I became angry and thought, this is not right. Why are these people living a comfortable life with my money? Why do I have to go through such hardship every day? My doubts soon turned into strong anger. I will get revenge on these 3 people. With this thought, my mind became clear as if a fog had lifted. I hired a detective to investigate my husband. To begin with, it was strange that he worked from morning till late at night and was paid that salary. Besides, my husband's attitude toward me had cooled since he had been promoted. I began to suspect that there was something behind this, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. My intuition was right. 2 weeks later, the detective showed me many photos of the scene of an affair, a young woman and my flirtatious husband. They seemed to meet frequently, and the evidence was easy to gather. I then consulted a lawyer and planted a recorder in our house. The purpose was to record my parents-in-law's treatment of me as evidence. The lawyer said that if I could get audio evidence, I could prove what they had done, and I could also claim alimony. The house was supposed to be for my mother, who had gone through a lot of hardship. And then the 3 of them entered the house knowing nothing. I will not forgive them. I first played a loud recording of my parents-in-laws yelling at me from my balcony so that all the neighbors could hear it. The neighbors were suspicious at first, but soon realized that it was the familiar voice of my mother-in-law. They were all puzzled and was trying to figure out what was going on. "What are you doing?" My mother-in-law's angry voice sounded exactly like the yell in the recording. My mother-in-law noticed this and said, "No, this isn't what it looks like." But it was too late. My in-laws rushed to the 2nd floor to come see me, and I said to them, "I can't take it anymore. I'm getting a divorce." I declared this to my in-laws. It seemed that my husband immediately heard about the commotion. It was only 7 o'clock at night, but he came home.
You! What have you done? How dare you humiliate my mother and father?
I tried to remain calm. "You're home early. You usually work until midnight," I told him. For a moment, my husband was upset.
I had to beg them to let me go home early because things were tough at home. You're giving the company a hard time. It's your fault.
He yelled at me menacingly, but I was no longer afraid of my husband's yelling. "Oh, I thought you were at your lover's place again." At those words, all 3 of them froze at the same time. My mother-in-law said, "Are you crazy?" But her expression remained the same. Then my father-in-law, as if in retaliation, banged on the desk and yelled at me.
You grew up poor, so we took you in. So it's only natural that you should show this level of filial piety.
That's right. You're so picky about money, but when you get married, your property belongs to you and your husband. Don't think that you can spend it as you please. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law, perhaps energized by the situation, began to yell at me in their usual tone of voice. Don't you know the law? If I get married and it's money I saved before we got married, it's mine. You are parasites living on my money." "What?" My mother-in-law choked on her words. Parasites. That's what my mother-in-law used to call me. This time I had to remind her who the real parasite was. In the presence of my lawyer, I confronted my husband with the divorce papers. At first, my husband said to me,
"Is this some kind of threat? I won't budge, you parasite."
He said,
"I can take your words as evidence of domestic violence,"
my lawyer said, and that shut him up. "I'm going to charge you for taking and spending my money without my permission for what the three of you did and said, and for your cheating on me." The three of them widened their eyes. My husband says that the affair is all a lie, so I told him. I didn't want to show this in front of your parents, but I laid out the photos in the envelope in front of my husband. The look on my husband's breathless face was truly exhilarating. As a result, my husband and in-laws decided to pay me alimony, and the house, which I had bought with my savings, became mine. I immediately replaced the locks and evicted the three of them. Immediately after the divorce, three of them yelled at my doorstep, but the visits naturally ceased as they could not bear the eyes of the neighbors, who heard the outbursts left on the recorder. The house is now occupied by my mother and me. I'm not getting married for a while, but I'm glad I did this. You did me a great favor. My mother seems to have liked the house more than she expected. She now holds tea parties with her friends every once in a while. A friend of mine asked me if I would help out at a company she recently started, and now I am spending busy but enjoyable days as a full-time employee. It seems I am a workaholic after all. Incidentally, my ex-husband was fired after he was caught cheating on me at work. Apparently, his boss found out that he went to a hotel while he was on his rounds. Apparently, his work attitude had been bad since he was promoted, and there was no upper management to oppose him. The person with whom he was having an affair was his coworker, and she apparently resigned voluntarily once rumors started spreading about her. It was probably a good thing for me that she was not fired. After all, I had demanded compensation from her as well. If she doesn't pay it, she'll be in trouble. The reason why I know this story is because the company where my ex-husband used to work is now an important business partner of ours. It is still a small company, but I am proud of the fact that they already have a good reputation. My in-laws cannot live on their pension, so they are working part-time for low wages to pay the rent and living expenses, including their unemployed son. Sometimes they would say outrageous things like, "I was supposed to live in a mansion," or "We've been cheated." My ex-husband is also having a hard time because he's being forced to build a house as soon as possible. But the construction workers told them that it would be impossible unless they work as well, and they have been quiet for now. My ex-husband seems to be having a rough life now, but it's just a nice feeling for me because I know his true nature. Let's go. I turn around with a start at the sound of my mother's voice. We are going shopping today. I need to forget the bad memories as soon as possible and enjoy life. Thank you for watching.